4. That's on, right? Yeah, y'all can hear that. Okay. Genesis 24, and I don't think we'll have a super long message tonight. Might actually be pretty short. And I'll try my best not to cough through the whole thing. But we want to continue with Genesis. In Genesis 24, we said that this is the longest chapter in all of Genesis. So it's not surprising that this is like our third or fourth message on this one chapter. But you'll recall that Abraham is dying. He's nearing death, and so he sends his servant to his homeland to find a wife for Isaac. His servant goes to the homeland, and he's praying and asking God that he would be able to find the proper woman for Isaac, and that she would be the type of woman of good character, who is humble and willing to serve and help others. And he finds that woman, and she says to him, you'll remember, let me water your camels. And if you'll recall, I know it's been a couple weeks since we've been here, but you'll recall that I said that in order to water camels, they have to drink pretty much all their water at one time. It's not just you give them a little bit of water. They fill up and they can store it. And so we were saying that for for Rebecca in this situation to descend into this well and then to water all the camels that the servant had with him, it would have been over 100 trips, probably close to 3 hours. In the desert heat, mind you, this is not a cool environment. And so that shows a lot about Rebecca and her character, that she meets a total stranger and she is immediately willing to serve him in this capacity. And so he's absolutely amazed by this. And so let's pick up, we're going to be in Genesis 24, in verse 22 is where we're going to start. The Bible says, when the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing half a shekel and 2 bracelets for her arms weighing 10 gold shekels and said, please tell me whose daughter you are. Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night? She said to him, I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor. And she added, we have plenty of both straw and fodder and room to spend the night. The man bowed his head and worshipped the Lord and said, blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and faithfulness toward my master. As for me, the Lord has led me in the way to the house of my master's kinsman. Then the young woman ran and told her mother's household about these things. And so we're going to get a lot of narrative here, a lot of just storytelling and about what happened. And so not much to say here other than he recognizes that it's the Lord who has provided this situation, who's brought Rebekah to him, and that this is all going to come together. And so keep going in verse 29. It says, now Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. Now, we're going to learn a lot more about Laban in the future, aren't we? If you've read Genesis, you know we're going to learn more about Laban. Excuse me. Don't want that to get in the microphone. It's going to be super loud. So, we're going to learn a lot more about Laban, but we're first introduced to him here, and he seems like an all right character at first, even though later it's going to be shown that he is a bit of a swindler. So, verse 29, Laban ran out toward the man to the spring, as soon as he saw the ring and the bracelet on his sister's arm and heard the words of Rebekah his sister. Thus the man spoke to me. He went to the man, and behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. He said, come in, O blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside? For I have prepared the house and a place for the camels. So the man came to the house and unharnessed the camels and gave straw and fodder to the camels, and there was water to wash feet and the feet of the men who were with him. Then food was set before him to eat. But he said, I will not eat until I have said what I have to say. And so Laban said, speak on. And so what's going to happen here, we're not going to just read the whole thing, but basically the servant is just going to recap the story to him. He's going to say, hey, I serve the Lord, I serve Abraham, Abraham sent me here, I said, Lord, provide me with a certain woman for Isaac, I'm going to say these words, and let this be the words that she says to me, and all this kind of stuff. He's just going to recount the whole story of what's happened. And so look at verse 45, that's where we're going to skip ahead. Actually, no. We're going to go to verse 50 after the story. It says, then Laban and Bethuel answered and said, the thing has come from the Lord. We cannot speak to you bad or good. So they say, we don't know whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, but all we know is that it is coming from the Lord. And so this is what happens next. It says, we cannot speak to you bad or good. Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. When Abraham's servant heard these words, or their words, he bowed himself to the earth before the Lord, and the servant brought out jewelry of silver and of gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave to her brother and to her mother costly ornaments. Now note that he's not just giving stuff to Rebekah, he's giving stuff to Laban and to the mother and to the family. And so this is going to play into what happens next. So notice it says, and he and the men who were with him ate and drank, and they spent the night there. When they arose in the morning, he said, send me away to my master. Her brother and her mother said, let the young woman remain with us a while, at least 10 days, and after that she may go. Now, why that? Why hold her back? Why say, well, just let her stay here a little bit longer? Any ideas? Yeah. Now we're getting at who Laban is. It's the same thing he's going to pull with Jacob in the future, where he's like, why don't you just work for, 7 years, and then you can marry my daughter. And then after 7 years, he's like, well, maybe another 7. It's no big deal. It's just a tradition that we have here. Basically, he's received a lot of goods, he's received a lot of stuff, and they're thinking, hey, if we hold her here longer, if she's really as valuable as they're making her out to be, they're going to give us more stuff. And so let's just see what we can get from them. So, verse 55, let the young woman stay with us. Verse 56, but he said to them, do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away, that I may go to my master. They said, let us call the young woman, and we'll ask her. And they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I will go. And so they sent away Rebekah, their sister, and her nurse, and Abraham's servant and his men. Now, before we read what they say next, what does that tell you about Rebekah by her answer? She wants out. Okay. Anything else? What does it say about her character, her person? Personality, character traits, anything. Obedient. Okay. Put yourself in her shoes again. Just think about her situation. She's just going about her normal day activity. You're going to Ingles, Walmart, whatever you got to do, pick up groceries, everyday activity. Someone comes to you in the produce section, okay? And they say, hey, listen, I'm from California, and I serve a very rich master, and his son needs a wife, and God told me that's you. So I need you to come to California with me. And you've never met him, but just trust me about this. It's going to be great. Great life ahead of you. I need you to come with me. There are no papers. There's no proof. There's nothing. You're just trying to do some grocery shopping. And so then you receive this stranger back into your house, and you have the opportunity to bow out. It's been a whole night. Even your family's like, well, hey, why don't you just stay here? Let's not make any rash decisions. But the servant, again, comes to you and says, this is from the Lord. Are you going to go with me? Now, if you think about it like that, how hard would it be for you to actually say what Rebekah said here and say, yeah, I'm going to go? It'd be pretty impossible, right? I mean, you're like, I just met this person. I have no proof. This could all be a story. You want me to travel all the way across the country for something that could just blow up in my face? It's like when you receive that email from the son of the dethroned king of Nigeria or whatever, and he's like, hey, look, Dad's rich, but I just need $10, get us back on our feet. We're going to ship you $10,000 in return. Help us out, okay? And you're like, well, I could, but this is probably not a good idea, right? And yet Rebekah recognizes that it is from the Lord, and not trusting the servant, because that's not who she's trusting here. And she's not even trusting Abraham or Isaac. She's trusting that this is what God has for her life, and that she needs to follow in obedience. And she decides that she's going to do that. Now, think about that in terms of us today, right? And just try to relate that to a situation. Because I doubt someone's going to come to you in the produce section of Ingles or Walmart or Aldi, wherever you do your shopping, and say, hey, look, you got to come with me. There's someone you need to marry. God told me this situation. But there are going to be times in our lives where God asks us to do something that seems just as impossible, right? To ask us to basically give up everything, to leave your life behind, to leave all your goods behind, to leave the life you knew behind, to sacrifice everything, your comfortability, the people you know. She knows no one over there at all. And God says, go. What are you going to do in that situation? If God were to say to you today, and I actually pray this would happen, I have no problem with this. If God were to say, I need you to drop everything and give your life to missions. I need you to move to Nepal. You don't know anyone there. You have to leave all your family behind. You have to leave your job, all your possessions, everything, and just trust that this is what I have for your life. Are you going to go? Now, we say, well, that's not going to happen to me. God's not going to ask me to do that. But think about all the things that God has already called us to do, that we don't have to be convinced of, that we don't need a sign in heaven to proclaim it to us, but things that He's clearly laid out in His words, in His Word, in the Bible, that He calls us to do, that we are required to do, that we make excuses not to do. We have so much more evidence than Rebecca had, so much more proof that this is legitimate and right and good, and yet we disobey where she obeyed. You see how that hits home for us? Where God, Jesus literally said, if you want to follow me, here's what you have to do. Deny yourself, take up your cross daily, and follow me. Are you denying yourself like that on a daily basis? Are any of us doing that? Are any of us denying ourselves? Are any of us taking up our cross on a daily basis and following Jesus? Are we saying, it's not what I want first and foremost? It's not what I want to do. It's not what I want to believe. It's not what I want to think. It's not what's going to be most comfortable for me. It's not what's going to be easiest for me. It's not going to be what comes most naturally to me. I'm going to do whatever God calls me to do, even if it is hard and requires great sacrifice. Are we doing that as God's people on a daily basis? I think about how different our church would look if we actually did do that. If we were to stop thinking about our own comfort and what we like to do in our comfort zone, and we are willing to actually step out in obedience and do the things that God requires us to do. Greet everybody with a holy kiss. Well, we're not going to kiss people, but you could go up to someone on a Sunday morning that you don't know and shake their hand, right? That's not leaving an entire land to go to a new land to marry someone you've never met, but it is following in obedience to something very simple that God has called us to do. See, I just think about these things when we read narratives like this, the lessons that we can glean from them, and I see someone here who is willing to be obedient even at a high cost of her own life because she's not putting herself first, she's putting the Lord first. And I wonder what our lives would look like and our church would look like if we were to actually imitate Rebecca here and do that in our lives. All right, so let's keep going and see what they say. Verse 60. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, our sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s, and may your offspring possess the gate of those who hate him. Now remember, that harkens back to Genesis 22, one of the final blessings of Abraham, where God said that you're going to possess the enemy or the gates of your enemies and things like that. And so they're basically saying that the blessings of Rebekah are falling in line with the blessings of the Lord. Verse 61, then Rebekah and her young women arose and rode on the camels and followed the man. Thus the servant took Rebekah and went his way. Verse 62, now Isaac had returned from Be'er Lahairoi and was dwelling in the Negeb. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening. And he lifted up his eyes, and he saw, and behold, there were camels coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes. And when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel and said to the servants, who is that man walking in the field to meet us? The servant said, it is my master. So she took her veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all the things he had done. Then Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah, his mother, and took Rebekah and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Now, a lot of important little tidbits here that we need to talk about. Did you notice there was a phrase repeated twice? The same phrase repeated twice. What was it? Very important phrase that we've seen all throughout Genesis so far. You got to catch these things as we go. Lifted up their eyes. You remember we talked about in Genesis that typically it happens right before a great blessing happens. So all the way back, Genesis 13, when God is showing them the promised land, and it says that Lot looked up his eyes and he chose his portion of the promised land, but then God told Abraham to look up his eyes and he showed him all the promised land that he was going to receive. And then we also said that that was used against Abraham in the future, because in Genesis 22, he looked up his eyes and what did he see? The place where he was going to sacrifice Isaac. But then the very next time he looked up his eyes, what did he see? The ram, the sacrifice, who was going to take the place of his son and allow him to keep him. And so there's this repeated phrase, look up your eyes, look up your eyes, and it denotes these blessings. And so Isaac lifts up his eyes and he sees the blessing that God has provided him, a wife, provision for the future. And she lifts up her eyes and she sees a husband and a provider. And you see this great coming together of the two of them and the love that they have for each other. This is actually the very first time in the Bible that love is mentioned in a marital setting. You don't read about Adam loving Eve. I'm sure he did. But this is the very first time in the Bible where love in a marriage is mentioned. Isaac loved Rebekah, and he literally had just seen her. It literally is love at first sight. He loved his wife. And notice that he takes her into the tent of Sarah. Now, let me be careful how I phrase this. What is the significance of being in Sarah's tent? We know what they did in there, so that's not the answer. But what is the significance of being in that place, taking Rebekah there? I mean, they could have just gone back to Isaac's tent, could have gone to anybody's tent. They specifically chose Sarah's, and there's a reason. All right, let's think about the context. What's happening here? Why? Let's think all the way back to the beginning of the chapter. Why is Abraham trying to find a wife for Isaac? Carry on the generation. Who's going to be the new head of the people of God? Isaac, right? And if he's the new patriarch, then who's going to be the new matriarch? And so he goes into the original matriarch's tent, Sarah, as a way of showing all the people of God, this is the new matriarch. She is the new mother of the Hebrew people. Just as Isaac is going to fulfill Abraham's place and take his place, Rebekah is going to take Sarah's place. And so it's this very beautiful symbolic gesture showing all the people that there is a new patriarchal family who are going to be the head of the household. And so there's a lot we can say here, but a couple things I want us to take away just in terms of application is, will you tell me, what should we take away from this whole story in this account? I mean, we've been talking about it's trying to get us to live as sojourners and strangers and what that looks like in a world today for us as Christians. How are we supposed to live as sojourners and strangers in this world? So what does this account do to help us live in that way? Trust God? Yeah. Yeah, we trust God. That's, yep, right there. And the last one, though, one of the biggest things is it helps us to understand the grand scheme. If we're going to live as sojourners and strangers in this world, as Christians in a non-Christian world, we need to understand the grand scheme. And here's what I mean by this. Okay, let's imagine that this is a line. I guess I can't actually put, that would be wrong. Wow, doesn't even erase. Okay, perfect. Let's imagine this line represents eternity. Now you realize I can't put the ends on it. That would not make it eternal. But let's imagine this line represents eternity, okay? You were there. Do you get it? If this is eternity, we are this little speck. We need to understand that the promises of God and the purposes of God and the plans of God do not revolve around us. And they certainly don't depend on us. God is not in heaven going, oh my goodness, if I don't have Alex Chapman, what are we going to do? If I don't have Michael Stevenson, this whole thing's going under. I don't even know how we're going to continue. The Bible clearly says God does not need us. But He wants us. And He, by His grace and His mercy, includes us in His plans. Now, here's what happens though. God calls us, He saves us, He begins to use us, and we get this puffed up mentality like, hey, everything depends on me, everything revolves around me. I am absolutely essential for this thing to succeed, right? And what happens in that situation is you refuse to believe that God can continue working apart from you. I want you to understand, that's how Abraham could have felt in this situation, right? He was the original patriarch. If anyone had the right to at least think to themselves, hey, if I'm not here, what is anybody even going to do, right? I'm the man. I'm the one God called from the land to go to a new land that He would share. I'm the one He made all the promises to. He said everything is going to be through me and my offspring. I am the man, and so God needs me. I must be able to stay here forever and live forever because nothing's going to get done without me. But is that what Abraham's doing in this passage? No. Actually, he's doing something that is a great model for every Christian. We're going to talk about it here just a little bit, is that Abraham recognizes that he is this tiny, infinitesimally tiny blimp on the whole line of eternity. And he says, I'm going to die. I'm nearing death. I'm not going to be here forever. And so what do I need to do? I need to be preparing the next generation. Because if this is eternity, let's imagine this line is the plan of God. And so Abraham is here. He's going to start this great plan of God. I mean, it actually started way back here, but we're just saying for his point, he's right here. And the plan's going to continue, but he knows that he's going to die. And so in order for the plans to continue, for the promises to continue, for the people to know what's going to happen next, for what God has already revealed to Abraham, for the lineage to continue, he's got to prepare someone to be able to continue after him. Do you see how important that is? And so as a father, he had been preparing Isaac for this, not just as his dad, but as the person that is going to come alongside the next patriarch of the people of God and say, this is how you lead. Our people are stubborn. This is how you lead them. Our sheep are going to go astray. This is how you get shepherds to watch over them. These people are good at this. These people are good at that. You have to recognize them and put them in their place and sort people. You are going to be the new head, Isaac. And so you have to be prepared. And Abraham took the responsibility upon himself to prepare the next generation to continue. Too few people do that today. Because we typically just think about ourselves, right? I found something I'm good at. I want to continue doing that. And I'll do it for as long as I can. And then I'll die. And then it's not my problem anymore. Right? This is why you can see some pastors who will pastor a church for 80 years, 60 years, 50 years, however long. And they have nobody after them who can just seamlessly fill in for them and take their place as though nothing has continued. That's the way it should be, right? That's the way it needs to be. But you'll have a person who'll pastor a church for 60 years and then one day decide, I'm done. And then the church is like, well, what do we do now? We have no leadership. We have no pastor. We need to form a search committee. We don't even have any prospects. What are we going to do? And then there's a split and then the church dies. Why? Because the pastor didn't take it upon himself to be preparing someone. And this isn't just for pastors, folks. This is for every individual Christian. I mean, there's so many great stories about things like this. You had St. Augustine, who was one of the greatest figures in all church history. You should definitely read his works. Read the Confessions. They're great. When he was finally nearing death, he had been training a young man to take his place. And on the first day that the young man preached instead of Augustine, the young man got up, and Augustine was sitting behind him. And the man got up and started speaking, and then he just stopped, and he said, "The cricket chirps while the swan is silent." And he felt totally inadequate, and yet Augustine didn't agree with him because he had been preparing that young man to take his place, and it was a seamless and smooth transition. And the young man realized he was actually prepared to do what he had been called to do. The same thing happened. Solomon Stoddard was a pastor of a church for 60 years. Same church. He took on an assistant, a young man who had been called to ministry named Jonathan Edwards. And when Solomon Stoddard finally decided it was time for him to retire, he had prayed, and he felt certain that God had called this young man to take over the church, and he felt certain that Jonathan Edwards was prepared because he had been training him and preparing him. And Jonathan Edwards literally started the Great Awakening. He was ready. He was prepared. G. Campbell Morgan, he was the pastor at Westminster, one of the most famous chapels and churches in the entire world. He had large congregations. I mean, you couldn't even imagine the size. And people came just to hear G. Campbell Morgan. Oh, this is the man. He took on an assistant when he was nearing the end of his ministry. He knew he was getting near the end. He took on a young man who had been a doctor in the medical field, who had left the medical field to pursue pastoral ministry because he felt like God was calling him. That guy's name was Martin Lloyd-Jones. Left the medical field to become a pastor, served as the assistant, and when G. Campbell Morgan, one of the most famous preachers ever, retired, Martin Lloyd-Jones seamlessly transitioned to become the pastor there. And he even grew the church bigger and bigger and bigger. He is my second favorite preacher of all time. Love that man. They had been prepared. I'm trying to do that right now. I've got Joseph. I'm pouring my life into Joseph so that if, God forbid, something did happen to me, he would be ready to just seamlessly take over until our church could find out what to do. I want him to know how to do everything. I want him to be prepared to do everything in case I were to get in some tragic accident. This church would have someone who could step up, who could preach, who could pastor, who could do everything that needs to be done because we're training him and preparing him. That's why I'm so passionate about having the North Greenville students. That's why I want to have a pastoral ministry or a residency program and interns. This is why every one of us needs to be discipling someone. This is what I'm going to be trying to ingrain into our men and our men's ministry. It is our responsibility as Christians to be pouring into the next generation. And so here's my question for you. And I'm getting a little, this is something I'm passionate about, so just forgive me for a moment, okay? We've got 5 minutes left. But I want you to think about your own ministry right now. Think about what you are doing. Think about what you're passionate about. The things that you know God has called you to do, that you're able to do, that you're equipped to do. Think about that right now. And then I want you to ask yourself, who are you discipling? Who is your number 2? Who are you preparing to take your place? Who are you pouring your life into and saying, this isn't just what I do, but this is why I do it? Who are you walking alongside and saying, I know that I might not be more spiritually mature than you. You may be more spiritually mature than me, but let's lock arms together. Let's do life together. I'll help you. You help me. We are going to disciple each other and help each other grow in the Lord and in our faith. If you were no longer able to do what God has called you to do in the ministry He has given you, who have you prepared to take your place like Abraham prepared Isaac? Have you thought about that? It's our responsibility to be training the next generations so that the church won't die. Because that's how churches die. I mean, I think about someone like Tommy Burdine and all that he does for properties. If he just decided he didn't want to do properties anymore, we'd be hurting. Think about what Teddy and Lowell do for the sound room and how if they just decided, don't do this, that we don't want to do anything with media ministry anymore, we'd be hurting. God has given us tasks. He's given us ministries. He's given us passions and things that we care about. We have to be pouring that into someone else because we're not going to be here forever. That's why we have to have the grand scheme. The Bible says our lives are like a vapor. They're here and they're gone. We're going to be talking about this a lot on Sunday. Don't think it's going to be depressing. I'm going to make it very joyful. But we're going to be talking about a lot about death on Sunday morning. We're going back to Ecclesiastes and the fact that it is good for us to realize and come to terms with the fact that we are all going to die one day because that helps us live better lives now. We don't want to waste our lives. We don't want to waste our ministries. The reason God has equipped you to do what He's called you to do is not just to live a life that's pleasing to Him, not just to glorify Him, but so that you can pass it on to the next generations. I give you a challenge. Go home tonight, open up your Bible to the book of Psalms. You don't have to read every single psalm, but do a cursory glance, and I want you to see how many psalms talk about teaching the next generation. I guarantee you will see it over and over and over again. The people of God have always taken this seriously. This is why, as parents, as grandparents, as people in the church, we have a responsibility to teach and train those who come after us so that the church will continue, the ministry will continue. My desire for this church, and I've said this to a number of people, is that I want the blessings that we have here, I want the ministry that we have here to outlive us, right? I mean, would it not be a shame if what we have going for us here died with us? If all of us were to just die in quick succession in a number of years, and then the church just stopped because no one's doing anything because they don't know what to do. They were never trained. I want to create a ministry here that has potential to outlive us so that long after we're gone and we're dead and we're with the Lord, even if they don't remember Alex Chapman or Michael Stevenson or Teresa or Edith or any of our names, the church is continuing and they're still having North Greenville speakers. They're still having pastoral residents. They're still working with the Lifehouse Children's Program and with Miracle Hill. They're still going out in the community and they're doing all the things that we've started here because it's outlived us. So even if they forget our names, it does not matter. We are a blip and we have a grand scheme mentality. We should be thankful that God has allowed us to be part of His plan at all. So that's a lot about what we can learn from these verses. And I was going to go into some other stuff, but we're just going to end there. And I'll just end with this. This is the ending of this chapter, and we've learned a lot. So anybody want to have a couple takeaways or some things that you think could be challenging for us or convicting for us or next steps or something that you think could be a next step in your own life about what to do moving forward, having studied this passage? Anything you want to share with the group, take away, or maybe something you haven't thought about before? All right. Yeah, for sure. It starts, just wait till you come to the men's ministry meeting. I'm going to be way harder on the men. But we need it. We need it. But this is something I'm very passionate about. And you so clearly see it in Abraham that as soon as he dies, there's no disruption with the plans of God or the purposes of God. There's no disruption with the people of God. Isaac fulfills that role because he has been well trained by his father. And so I think as we all leave here this evening, we need to be thinking and asking ourselves as we leave, just be thinking, who am I discipling? Who am I doing life with? Who have I locked arms with? And I could just call them up and they would pray with me. Or I could meet them for coffee and we could do a devotional together. I could teach them this. They could teach me that. So who are you discipling? Who are you being discipled by? And who are you preparing to take over your ministry? It is not, I guess I should say, it is not yours. And it just breaks my heart when I see so many pastors at so many other churches where they are so, I don't know if insecure is the right word, but they're so insecure about sharing or having someone else in the pulpit or teaching anybody to do what they do because they worry that their job's on the line, that they do everything themselves and they don't pour into anybody. And it's like, I can just see that church and know there is going to be a devastating day when that person leaves and when they retire and the church isn't going to know what to do. The greatest compliment you could give me is this church could run without you. If one day we can get to that point, that would be amazing, that if I were to die in a tragic accident, the church would go on seamlessly because we have been prepared. I want you to be thinking about that as you leave. Who are you preparing to fulfill your ministry? Michael, how about closing us in prayer?